In this video, we're going to have a good long look at Warhammer 40,000 10th edition, the Leviathan boxed set. Here it is, folks, 10th edition Warhammer 40,000, and it comes in this very slim little book. No, I'm just kidding, of course. This isn't Warhammer 40,000 10th edition. This is 1st edition, Rogue Trader, the first ever book. And I didn't buy this one second hand. Oh no, I went out to the shops and bought it when it was released back in the, when was it published? 1987, actually. Well, there you go, one of my precious possessions. But here we are at 10th edition. Wow, unbelievable. Before we get started, let me point out that Games Workshop sent me this set for free. I don't charge for this video and my opinions are my own. I remember back in the day, let's go back in the Wayback Machine to the days of my youth, when Warhammer Fantasy Battle was all the rage and they started bringing out these Space Marine miniatures and making little allusions in White Dwarf magazine to the upcoming science fiction tabletop miniatures game. And everyone went, oh, this sounds very exciting. Little did they realise that it would become the flagship product of Games Workshop and go on to sell gazillions of Space Marines over the intervening years. And here we are at 10th edition. It's really quite exciting. Now, if you're thinking, who is this person and why is he talking about Warhammer 40,000 as if he knows what he's talking about? I don't see him on all the forums and the special places where everyone talks about Warhammer 40,000. Well, that's because I love all kinds of games and I play lots of games, but I do have a special spot in my heart for Games Workshop, I must admit, and that's because they were there right at the start when I first discovered games. Well, not right at the start, because I started in like 1978 with Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. But it wasn't long before I actually discovered a game store in town and they had White Dwarf issue number 4, which I bought. And from then on, I was absolutely hooked on the wonderful world of Games Workshop stuff. In fact, way back in the day after I left school, I actually sent them some illustrations and a little blurb in an attempt to get a job with Games Workshop as a graphic designer stroke illustrator. They never got back to me, sadly. Well, I reckon that's just Games Workshop's loss. Anyway, I went on to play many, many Games Workshop games. Though, as I've said before, I tended to concentrate more on the big box games like Adeptus Titanicus, Necromunda, Mordheim, Man of War, that kind of stuff, rather than their big two, which was Warhammer Fantasy Battle and Warhammer 40,000. However, I have played them over the years, and just to prove my little credentials, let's look at this pile here. Yep, I don't have them all. I missed out on a few and some wayward years where I did things like sort of chase after girls and play in a band and not play many games, but I do have most of them. And in fact, just the other day, I purchased on eBay the Space Marines from 2nd edition. This one here, because for some reason I'd given them to a friend back in the day or something, so I bought them so I could make that set whole again. And it cost me a fortune. It was ridiculous. Anyway, here we are with 10th edition, and what a beautiful box set it is. There are 72 miniatures in this box set. You get a whole heap of Space Marines and a whole heap of Tyranids and a very large, thick book. Here it is. You also, of course, get the instructions to build them all and a transfer sheet and some nice cards. I'll show you those in detail in just a minute. So, Warhammer 40,000, 10th edition, Leviathan. Let's have a little chat about it. So I received this box set in the mail just under a month ago, and I thought, that's okay. You know, it's a bit of time pressure, but I'm sure I can paint all these 72 miniatures in a month and get them fully painted to show them to you. However, then another Games Workshop box set arrived. It was Kill Team Gallowfall. And then another one arrived, which was Warcry Nightmare Quest. And then another one arrived, which was Kill Team Ashes of Faith. And of course, I had to build all the miniatures in these sets and do some painting as well. I painted some of Warcry and I painted some of Gallowfall. Anyway, I've been doing a lot of painting in the last month. And as much as I tried to get this set fully painted, as you can see, it isn't. I've got most of them up to a very, very rough battle standard, but the larger Tyranid figures I haven't painted yet. I've only done a base coat on the Dreadnought. But I think this will give you a little bit of an idea of what they look like when they're painted. However, of course, I will continue to paint this beautiful set, and my plan is to do a comprehensive 10th edition battle report, which I think will be a lot of fun. We're going to have a big table with a lot of great terrain and have a bit of a laugh and try out these new rules. In the meantime, however, I can show you what's in the set, and just please keep in mind they're not finished paint jobs yet. So let's have a talk about the miniatures first, and then we'll get into the rulebook and some of the changes in 10th edition. Now, of course, you've got Space Marines here. You can paint them up, of course, as any chapter you wish. I've done Ultramarines because after much deliberation and wondering which chapter I was going to paint, back in the last edition in Indomitus, I thought, I'm just going to go classic, going to go trad and paint them as Ultramarines. Because, you know, there's something classic about the old blue Space Marines. The good thing this time around, of course, is that I've got myself a can of Macragge blue, and after undercoating these in black, I just sprayed blue over the top, allowing a little bit of the black on the underside and everything, and instant base coat. Wow, what a time saver. You can go straight in and start doing the details and the highlighting, and, you know, pick out a bit of shadow if you want to, but it really saves a lot of time. And the thing I thought about this set is I really wanted to get it painted pretty quickly. Hopefully in time for this video, but that didn't work out, but certainly in time to get them on the table and start playing with them as soon as possible. So a base coat like that of the base colour of your Space Marine chapter is an absolute godsend. You can get those base colours on and start getting them done pretty quickly. Similarly with the Tyranids, I wanted to come up with a scheme which was relatively fast and easy to do, and I didn't want anything too bright and colourful. I know that the Games Workshop studio paint jobs for the Tyranids tend towards the pretty colourful. I wanted something more sort of organic and insectoid, that's not really a word, is it? Insectoid. I'd seen on the web some really nice shots of Tyranids painted in just a white and black colour scheme, and I like that idea. I also like the look of the traditional alien from the Alien films, the xenomorph from the Alien films. So I decided to go with a bit of a mix between the two and go with a sort of chitin-like skeletal colour contrasted with a black. Now what I've done with this is most of the figure is washed with Skeleton Horde contrast paint, which is fantastic. It brings out all the detail in these lovely miniatures very quickly, which looks great. And then I used Black Legion contrast paint, which flows beautifully on all the black areas. Once that was dry, I gave the black areas a dry brush with Runefang Steel, just to pick out the highlights with a steel colour. And when that was dry, I washed over that with a blue wash, so the highlights of the black have a blue tinge to them. Any tentacle areas and weapons and things like that, I've washed with Gwilliam Flesh, which is a nice red fleshy colour. And highlighting those with a Shabti Bone gives them a kind of very fleshy look, which is nice. It's a very, very quick and easy paint job to get a good effect with straight away. And then you can spend all the time you want highlighting them carefully to make them look even better. So let's go through these figures and you can see them in a bit more detail. First up, you've got a Captain in Terminator armour. Absolutely spectacular figure. Now I have noticed even a little bit more scale creep on these figures. If you compare one of these Space Marines to a Marine from the Indomitus set, you can see it's getting significantly bigger. So even though we went through the big scale change when we went through the whole Primaris Marines jump, they're still getting a little bit bigger. I don't know why they're doing that, but probably one day we'll be playing with 54mm scale miniatures, let's face it. Next up, here's the Librarian in Terminator armour. Very, very nice figure. And of course, this guy's got psychic powers, so there's this real sense that he's exerting his psychic power on the enemy. We've got this Apothecary Biologist, and this one I've actually finished. I've taken this one all the way through because it was the only one in white Terminator armour. So I thought I'd completely finish this paint job. And look at all the lovely detail and gubbins on that figure. This is a Lieutenant in Phobos armour. So he's definitely a bit more rough and ready. He's got bits of Terminator armour built onto his existing armour. So he's definitely much more of a hunter and survivalist. This 5 Marine squad is a Stern Guard veterans squad. And they're wearing these very nice cloaks or tabards or whatever you call them. Make them look nice and distinctive. Then of course we've got a Terminator squad. It's all about the Terminators. Some beautiful big Terminators. And just for fun, here are some of the earliest Terminators ever made from the original Space Hulk set. And then some more Terminators in subsequent Space Hulk sets. The Terminators also come with this Teleport Homer. And finally we've got the Infernus squad, 10 Marines led by a sergeant, and ready to spew huge gouts of flame upon the Xenos. The feature of the Marines, of course, is this Ballistus Dreadnought, and what a huge meaty fellow he is. Look at the size of it. It's absolutely huge. Let's compare this to this much earlier Dreadnought. I think this is from about 4th, 5th edition. And you can see the scale creep going on there. This guy is huge. Okay, what about the horrible Tyranids? Now, I've always liked the Tyranids and actually wanted a Tyranid army because I just love that sort of purely alien feel about them. However, earlier Tyranid models have been just a little bit cartoony for my taste. Haven't quite hit the mark. I think they're really getting there with these. The Termagants look so much better, and this huge hunter screamer killer thing is unbelievable. A beautiful figure. They've got a much more sort of sharp-edged, more detailed, nasty look to them now, which I really appreciate. So we've got this Tyranid Prime with tucked-in folded wings, membranous wings. This Neuro Tyrant, which is basically like a floating brain, and that has 2 Neuraloids that come with it. Mini floating brains, basically. There are 3 Von Ryan's Leapers, which are just really nasty looking and put me in mind of the bugs from Starship Troopers. You've got this huge pack of 20 Termagants, and they come with 2 Ripper Swarms as well. And this is a really impressive pack of Termagants. It's going to look fantastic on the tabletop. There's a unit of Neurogaunts with 1 Neurogaunt Node Beast. 5 of these Barb Gaunts, which have big shoulder-held organic missile launcher type guns. The previously mentioned Screamer Killer, which is just a fantastic model. And wow, I remember the original version of this. It was quite a small model, but this one is huge and nasty and just looks like it's about to rip you limb from limb. Fantastic model. And then finally there's the Psychophage, which is a really alien looking, truly horrible thing, and I just love the way its mouth is way down there on the level of a human. So you just get swallowed up in that horrible toothy maw. Really horrible looking thing. Well, let's have a look through this huge and beautiful book, shall we? Now, if you're like me, you've read the whole background blurb about the Imperium and the Xenos and the Emperor and all that stuff. Lots and lots of time, so there'll be no surprises here. But, as always, it's all beautifully laid out and looks great and tells you all about the hobby. It shows you lots of beautiful pictures of beautifully painted miniatures and great artwork, and even some old classic shots like this beautiful John Blanche shot of the doors to the Imperial main throne room. There's a beautiful map of the Imperium, space, and heaps of information about all that stuff. Now, as I've said many times before, I don't really go in for all the background material too much. After a while, this kind of prose kind of goes in one ear and out the other for me. But, of course, your mileage may vary. You may really be into the background material and all the detail and want to make sure that the chapters that you create are all perfectly legal in terms of the codex for the way that the paint schemes and the iconography works. The great thing about this particular hobby is that it accommodates all types of players, from the most casual to the most deeply involved. So you can get as involved in this as much as you want. However, this is the point where things get a little bit different, and I got quite excited. And that is, instead of the usual sections on all the different Space Marine chapters and the Xenos races and all that kind of thing, everything is broken into combat patrols. They are really pushing this idea of the combat patrol. And these are small forces that are already set up and all relatively balanced, and you can just grab one of these combat patrols, either from a box set that's available to buy or from your existing collection of miniatures, and you can each slap one of these down on the table and start playing right away. And I absolutely love this idea. As far as I'm concerned, this is the best thing they've done for ages, and it's because it really takes into account casual gamers like me. I mean, for many, many years, Warhammer 40,000 has been getting more and more complicated, more and more involved, and more written for the kind of lifestyle gamers who play it to the exclusion of everything else. Now they've suddenly realised that, oh look, there are people who just pick up and play occasionally, and they don't want to go to tournaments, and they don't want to have huge campaigns and all the rest of it. As I said, I play lots of different games, and Warhammer 40,000 is just one of them. So I love the idea that I can just make up a combat patrol from one of these lists, from one of these selections, and just slap it on the table and play. In fact, the whole army building part of the process is, to me, the least interesting part of the game. I don't really want to go through and add up points and carefully adjust war gear so I get exactly the right type of points and make each unit exactly right for its particular task and all that. I just don't have time for that kind of thing. Now, of course, you can still do that kind of thing if you wish, but They're now catering to people who just want to pick up and play, and I just absolutely love that. And in fact, looking through this section that shows all of the different combat patrols, I was immediately thinking, well, I've got old models that can make up some of these patrols. I've got some Tau figures that I've only used once in a game, but I can now bring out as a combat patrol. Maybe I'll have to buy one or two more models to make it up to the selection that's available here. But then I can put it on the table and play it without buying the codex and going to all that extra trouble. Now, of course, all the unit cards for these different forces are going to be available for free, so you won't have to buy the codexes unless you want to get into all the background detail information, which again is fantastic. Absolutely love it. Best thing about this new edition. I think it's really good. Now, by the way, let me just apologise if there are a few more cuts in this video than normal, and that's because I'm on the tail end of a flu and I've got this bad cough. So little do you realise that I'm coughing all the way through this video and just cutting them all out as much as possible. By the same token, I talked before about that big choice you have about picking a particular Space Marine chapter, whether one that exists already or one that you make up yourself. And the great thing about this now is that with some of the Space Marine figures that I have, I can paint them up in the colours of a different chapter. And so let's play a game with Dark Angels, or let's play a game with Blood Angels, or play with Ultramarines, or Space Wolves, or whatever you want, and just try out something on a small scale with a completely different chapter, because all these chapters are going to have quite unique rules that give you the flavour of that particular chapter. Again, a fantastic thing. You don't have to feel like every time you buy a model that you're contributing to your one huge army which perfectly recreates this particular aspect of this particular chapter. And of course, it's a very clever business decision, because people will just be buying a combat patrol box for a new army just to try it out, and then of course if they enjoy that army they're going to add more figures to it. Or they might do as I said, which is have old figures which they then say, well, I'm just going to buy a couple more models for that and bring it up to the combat patrol. It's a very clever business decision as well as a gaming decision. And not only can you make up combat patrols with old figures, but you can get them out of box sets as well. For example, the old Deathwatch Overkill game had some fantastic Chaos Cultists, Genestealer Cultists in it. Now, if I use those miniatures and I add a few more, I can quickly make up a Genestealer Cults combat patrol and play with it on the tabletop. Of course, for the Ultramarines and the Tyranids, you've already got enough models in this set to make up the two combat patrols that are in the main book and play with them right away. So you can really, really quickly, once you've downloaded the particular unit cards from the website for these two combat patrols, you can get these two armies on the table and playing a game really quickly, quicker than ever before. Now, of course, I mentioned the core rules are available for download from the Games Workshop website. And instead of just giving a small version of the rules, a cut down version, they've actually taken the whole chunk out of the rulebook here, which is in fact is separately numbered for that very purpose. They've taken this whole chunk out and made it available for download. Yay! At last! Finally, after all this time, Games Workshop have caught up with the rest of the tabletop miniatures world and are making their rules available, because it's all about the models. Let's face it, you know, they want to sell models. They're not so interested in selling this book of rules. They want people playing the game, so they buy as many miniatures as possible. So I just think this is fantastic. I'm going to do a summary of those core rules to make it even shorter and make it available on my website. But I think it's really, really nice. And also, coupled with the fact that they're going to make the unit cards available for every one of these factions, I just think they're making the game more accessible to new players and existing players than ever before. The combat patrol system has 6 different scenarios you can choose from, so you can get your armies on the tabletop quickly. So to me, that's the good about this review. The best thing about this new edition is the new combat patrol system. I just think it's great, and it gets your games on the tabletop as fast as possible, and I know I'll be playing a lot more games of Warhammer 40,000 because of it. Now, I won't go into detail about the rules, of course. They're very similar to the last set. In fact, I did a summary of this new core set, and I did it over my last summary of the last edition, and there aren't too many changes. There's some nice simplifications. They've certainly cut down on things. There's less complexity in the number of stratagems and extra things that you have to buy. The only thing I was disappointed about in this edition is that I thought 10th edition would be a perfect opportunity to do the one thing that I really wish they'd do with Warhammer 40,000, and that is get rid of the 2 wound roll. Now, I've talked about this many times before, and I'm sure lots of people will have many, many arguments in terms of dice probabilities and all that kind of thing to say, no, we can't change that. But I really think this idea that you have to roll to hit, roll to wound, and then the other person rolls to save, is a system that just has so many flaws. And mainly they're psychological ones. You have to roll so many dice and there are so many opportunities for disappointment. Now, a game system should push forward. You should feel like you're always sort of going forward and enjoying yourself and you're being rewarded for doing exciting things. However, every time something attacks in Warhammer 40,000, you get a big bunch of dice and you roll to hit. And then you go, yay, I hit. But no, you haven't hit. You haven't done what you're trying to do by rolling the dice. Then you've got to get all the hits and you've got to roll to wound. So again, you have to go through that process. You roll all those dice. It slows the game down. And then you might go, yay, I hit with even less of them. Great. So you've gone through 2 phases of, am I going to hit? Yes, I hit. Yeah, I'm going to hit. Yes, I'm going to hit. And then the other person takes those dice that hit and they do armor saves. So maybe after 3 rounds, that last person may have rolled all their saves and nothing gets hit. Now, I'm sorry, this is just psychologically devastating. I really do think. And I know people have played Warhammer 40,000 for decades all over the world and enjoyed this system. I just find it so frustrating. What I want to do is I want to roll to hit, and then the other person, yeah, I'll give them a chance to defend. They can do a save. But that step in between, that roll to wound step, I just think it's totally unnecessary and it should be expunged from the game immediately. The game would be so much faster. You wouldn't have that feeling of disappointment when you've rolled twice to get your hits and to get your wounds, and then the other person just saves them all. You think, well, why did we just spend the last X number of minutes rolling these handfuls of dice only to get no hits whatsoever? Because there's too many opportunities to miss. And I know the idea here is that it evens things out on a level, but I just think if the game was rebalanced and redesigned, you could get rid of that wound step altogether and make the game faster, snappier, more fun, more positive. It would be great. And I really wish they'd taken that huge leap in 10th edition. I think it would have been a good time to do it. However, I think it's going to take a while yet. I think it will happen one day. Mark my words. I think eventually they'll get rid of the 2 wound step. I'm just going to put that out there. One day, in the far future, they'll look back on this video and say, look, Peter from the Esoteric Order of Gamers said they'd get rid of the 2 wound step, and they did eventually in 2064. So folks, that's the bad. Yes, the bad to me is the 2 wound step, and it would have been really good if they'd taken this opportunity at 10th edition to get rid of it. Oh well. After the rules section, there's a big section called The Shadow Descends, and this is all about the attack of Hive Fleet Leviathan and the Tyranids attacking the Imperium. So I must admit I haven't read it all. I mean, I will eventually, but it's all background information about that and the new campaign, the war zone that it's set in and all the events of that. Again, if you're really into the background, you'll love that kind of stuff. Then there's a big showcase section which gives you heaps and heaps of pictures of painted Tyranids and Ultramarines. We've still got the Crusade system, which is where you track your army over a sequence of battles and develop them as you go along from basic recruits all the way up to veterans. I've never actually tried a Crusade campaign, only because I just don't play Warhammer 40,000 that much, and I don't play that many battles to actually do a Crusade system. But I think it's a great option for those of you who want to play a sequence of games and want to develop your force through those games. There's a great campaign system here as well for a tyrannic war campaign. There's 15 missions here to play that narrative campaign, so heaps and heaps of stuff if you really want to get into Space Marines versus Tyranids. And then we come to this interesting little box here. What's this? I hear you ask. Well, it's a deck of nice tarot-sized cards, and some of them are deployment ones, which show a deployment map. We've also got gambit cards here for attacker and defender, mission rules, primary mission, secondary missions for attacker and defender. This all reminds me a little bit of Warcry. What's going on here? Well, it's all described in this leaflet that comes in the little box, and they're called Leviathan games. So they're chapter-approved battles waged is by following this sequence. They're designed for incursion and strike force battle sizes, so relatively small army sizes. You muster your armies. You determine a mission by splitting the cards into their respective decks: deployment deck, mission rule deck, primary mission decks, secondary mission decks, gambit decks, Set aside the secondary mission and gambit decks, and then you determine your mission by shuffling and randomly drawing one deck from the deployment mission, rule, and primary mission decks, just as you do in Warcry. I really like this. This is great. Then you read the mission. It details how you score your victory points and everything. Place your objective markers, create the battlefield, determine attacker and defender. You select secondary missions. There are 2 decks, one for the attacker and defender. You've got a choice of fixed and tactical missions. You set up your battle formations, so which leaders go with bodyguard units and things like that, transport models, etc. Deploy your armies, determine the first turn, resolve pre-battle rules, begin the battle, determine victor. Whew. And remember, you've also got these gambit cards. These contain goals that players can attempt to achieve by the end of the battle instead of attempting to score any more victory points from their primary mission. I won't go into all the detail of that, but basically you have this neat little system here for coming up with Leviathan battles. Card driven, and I love this kind of stuff. As I've said many times before, I really like the Warcry system, which sets up with cards. Again, another quick and easy way to get your games going. I really like this emphasis on speed and variety as well. So I'm going to put that in the good category, absolutely, definitely. Now, there's another thing I haven't talked about yet that's firmly in the good category. That is the redesign of the data sheets, which have been simplified rather beautifully. What they've done, instead of the long stat line that's been with us since first edition, they've taken out a lot of the stats and they've put them in the weapon profile line, which is just brilliant. So if you look on the data sheet, the only things that are in the main area of the stat line are movement, toughness, save, wounds, leadership, and OC. Now, OC is a value you can total to see the strength that you have for holding objectives. But everything else, range, attacks, ballistic skill, strength, armor piercing and damage, all go down into the actual stat line for the weapon. So they've taken a bit of a conceptual leap here. Instead of saying that every bolter is exactly the same throughout the universe and the person or creature who is wielding it is the thing that makes the difference, they've actually said, well, a bolter wielded by this particular creature has this strength and this number of attacks and blah, blah, blah. And if it's wielded by a marine, it has this number of attacks and everything, which is great because it's not cluttering up the main stat line and is only referred to when you need it. It's a very small change, quite a subtle change, but I think it's quite an important one, and anything that simplifies those unit cards is a good thing by my book. Well, we're coming to a close now, and I could go into a lot more detail about the Warhammer 40,000 rules, of course, but you must forgive me because my throat is starting to go and the edits are coming thick and fast as I keep stopping every few sentences to cough. Sorry about that. However, of course, there are going to be heaps of videos on the web, deep diving into the rules and all that kind of stuff if you want to get into it. That's not usually the kind of stuff I'm interested in. I'm just interested in a new set with some cool models and some slightly simplified rules. And as I said, this combat patrol system is great. But I did call this the good, the bad, and the ugly. So it's time to point out the ugly. It's a small thing, but there's one rule in this edition which drives me bonkers. I think it's very ugly. And I can't remember whether it was in the last edition or not. If it was, maybe I just blanked it out. But we've got combat patrol missions here. As I said, there are 6 missions to choose from. And, of course, you get victory points for achieving your objectives. However, there is a rule here on page 205, and it is called Battle Ready. And that is, when you play a game of Warhammer 40,000, there are 10 victory points available if every model in your army is painted to a Battle Ready standard. Battle Ready means your models are fully painted with a detailed or textured base. Games Workshop, nah, sorry, don't tell me whether I should paint or not paint my miniatures. Now, if you're in a tournament situation, there's nothing wrong with the tournament saying your figures must be painted and everything. That can be the rules for the tournament. But to put this rule in the actual book as an official rule, I think is really kind of wrong. And it's kind of gatekeepy as well. There's a long and storied history of people playing games of Warhammer 40,000 with unpainted miniatures because they just didn't get around to painting them. If you play a game with somebody and the other person says, I'm getting 10 victory points because your models aren't painted and mine are, tell them to bugger off. Utterly ignore this rule. It's absolutely ridiculous. Who would sit down with somebody and play a game with Warhammer 40,000 and they got an extra 10 points just because a couple of your models weren't painted to the standard that Games Workshop has identified as battle ready? Nah. So that's my ugly rule. And, you know, in the scheme of things, it's a pretty small thing, but I really think they should have expunged that completely from the rule book. It's not up to Games Workshop to tell us how we should enjoy their products. We'll play them any way we want. And if we decide to play them with unpainted plastic miniatures, if we decide to paint them with miniatures which we've done extensive kit bashing to and call them different things and decide to use different stats, we can do that too. Once a game leaves the publisher and we buy it, it becomes our game. So don't tell us that you get victory points for painting models to a particular standard. Anyway, folks, that aside, what a fantastic box set this is. It's really impressive. It's got me excited about Warhammer 40,000 again. And as I said, I'm going to be putting together some of those combat patrols to try out different factions in a way that I've never actually gone to the trouble of doing before. First thing I've got to do is finish painting up these figures. You will see them fully painted and in action when I do a battle report. I promise you that will be coming as soon as humanly possible. And after I've got over this terrible cough. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have any comments at all, if you want to argue with me about anything, even if you think that rule about painting units to battle ready standard for 10 victory points is a good idea, I'm not going to agree with you, but we can argue about it. Just leave a comment below in the comments section and I answer every single comment. Of course, you can also chat with me and follow everything that I do on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, Mastodon, Instagram. And if you sign up to my Patreon channel, there's a Patreon feed as well. And you can also contact me via the website. Send me an email. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now. Good gaming.